Hello everyone. So this week we remain in Elea to talk about Zeno of Eleatis, who is Zeno of Elea, of course, about whom we heard last time when we were talking about Parmenides, and we talked about Plato's Parmenides, where he describes this scene where Parmenides and Zeno come to visit the Panathenea, where they encounter a young Socrates and have a discussion. Now, this actual meeting might be entirely fictional, something created by Plato to create the scene, but they might actually have visited, and there's no reason to believe that he was absolutely wrong about their ages. So we sort of get more or less an idea that Zeno lived from about 490 to 430 BC. So just counting his floruit about 40 years after Parmenides, so that would be about 450 or 460 BC or thereabouts. He was, as we know, a student of Parmenides. Plato insinuates also a lover of Parmenides, his favorite, as he says, right? And he says that 25 years his junior. And you would have heard of Zeno probably via what are called Zeno's paradoxes, and that's what we have, and that is the main contribution of Zeno to the history of philosophy, and it's a pretty big contribution, and to the history of not just philosophy but the history of mathematics and the history of physics. So it's a big deal. I mean, for somebody who so what Plato is also saying out there is that Zeno has come to defend Parmenides' thesis. So he presents his treatise, Zeno's treatise, at that event. Parmenides is old and well known, and Zeno is there to sort of defend his thesis. So the idea that we get from Plato's Parmenides is that Parmenides is the fellow who comes up with the real deal, the proper thesis that everything is one. We've discussed that last week, so hopefully you still recall it, where he talks about the fact that there's only one single entity and there's no motion, there's no plurality, there is no divisibility, it's one, unique, spherical as well. So all these things, and Zeno, his student, apparently wrote this text to defend his master's thesis, basically, to sort of argue against people who would claim that there is such a thing as motion, there is a plurality of sort of being. So it's assumed that he wrote this to argue against these notions. And how did he do it? He did it by the way of paradoxes. Now, what is a paradox? So, para in Greek, it's a preposition which can have many meanings, but one of the meanings, is that it can be something that is exclusionary. So, you can say apart from, or in fact, even like paratus nomus would be contrary to, or against, or in violation of. And doxa, very well, it's opinion, appearances, beliefs, the common sort of opinion. So a paradox would be something that runs against or contrary to the common opinions or the beliefs of people, or appearances even, against appearances. So that's the sort of etymological sort of sense of paradox. In Greek, in Latin, I suppose antinomy, against the law, sort of a thing, paratus numus. Anyway, so Aristotle credits Zeno as having come up with this very important method in the history of mathematics, which is the method of the reductio ad absurdum. And we have talked about it those of you who did logic with me last semester would recall this, which is this, the reductio, the reductio, is basically a method in which you claim the opposite of something. So let's say I want to prove that there is no such thing as plurality, like Zeno. And then, so what do? I basically claim that there is plurality and show how that would lead me to an absurdity, to some kind of an absurdity which is a logical contradiction. So let's say, and in logic, if for those who have done it, it's a repetition, but it's good for you to think of it again. So what is a contradiction? If you say A and not A, or P and not P, so that would be kind of, it would break the law of non-contradiction, as Aristotle would have called it. So the method that is applied by Zeno of Elea, or sort of used and in some ways perfected as far as Aristotle is concerned, is this of this reductio ad absurdum, where he will take, for example, saying, oh, let's assume there is motion. Well, this would prove that there are trees and there are no trees. I mean, this is not an example from Zeno, but I'm just saying that this is how the reductio works. So Zeno use this with this aim, if you are to believe Plato, of defending the thesis of Parmenides, right? And so the style that he used is, and as you know with reductio ad absurdum, that the style is that of arguments from hypothesis, right? A reductio ad absurdum, again a revision for some of you, is based on starting with a hypothesis. So you say you want to prove something, so you start with a hypothesis saying, let's assume X. In a reductio ad absurdum, or an indirect proof as we called it last time, you basically, the hypothesis that you assume is a contrary of what you want to prove. So let's say you want to prove that there are infinite natural numbers or something, right? There are infinite natural numbers. So you will start with a hypothesis saying, let us assume that there is a largest natural number, which means that natural numbers are finite in number, right? So there is a largest natural number. And then you would go on with your proof, like to draw the consequences from that. So you could draw the consequences by saying then, well, let this number be n, but then n plus 1 will also be a natural number, because, you know, if you add 1 to a natural number, it would still remain a natural number. And but if n is the largest natural number, then n plus 1 is not the largest. N plus 1 is larger than the largest natural number which we assumed in the first place, which contradicts, which means that n is both the largest natural number and not the largest natural number, which is a contradiction, which then, because we arrived at the contradiction, we can sort of then assume that something went wrong in the past. And most likely, we started with the wrong assumption, because that's the one thing that we did not prove properly, right? We had one assumption in there saying that let n be the largest natural number, right? So n is not the largest natural number, which means that there is, so that's how you prove, that via contradiction or via this hypothesis. So, and we can discuss it in our interactive sessions, then I can, actually write it, and we can use the PowerPoints and stuff. So, basically, in an argument by hypothesis ad absurdum, you use it to show that based on a particular hypothesis, you will reach impossible and contradictory sort of conclusions, and it's inescapable. You will necessarily, if you start with something that is is wrong, it's sort of what was it? X false, so sort of, from a falsity anything follows, or from a contradiction anything follows, that's sort of an argument. So, in fact, the first argument of Zeno that we have from Plato it goes something like, if existing things are many, they will be both like and unlike, so that sort of a thing. And this is one of the ones that are not taken too seriously, because it's really confusing to see, I mean, how does this even make sense, that if existing things are many, then they're both like and unlike. But, I think the idea is that any one thing is both like others, because both of them exist, and unlike the other, because it's not like the other, but then some part of it could be unlike. So there's some problem with continuity and discretion out here. Basically, I'm just sort of putting this forward to explain to you the style in which it was argued. In fact, I'll read out this section from Plato's Parmenides, where this discussion continues. So from in the last one we talked about the arrival of Parmenides and Zeno in Athens and meeting with Socrates. Then after that, Zeno sort of read out his treatise. So after this, so you have Plato write, after Socrates had listened to Zeno reading his treatise, he asked him to repeat the first hypothesis of the first argument. After it had been read through, he said, "What do you mean by this, Zeno? Is there, if there are many things, they must be both like and unlike one another. And this is impossible because dissimilar things cannot be similar and similar things cannot be dissimilar. Is this what you mean?" So I'm reading this out to give you an idea of the style of this argument, right? "Yes," says Zeno. "So if it is impossible for dissimilars to be similar and similars to be dissimilar, it is also impossible for there to be a plurality of things, because if there were a plurality of things, they would be liable to impossibilities. Is this the point of your argument? Isn't it precisely to insist, contrary to everything that is said, that there is no plurality? And don't you think that each of your arguments proves just this same point, with the result that you think that you have come up with as many proofs that there is no plurality as you have written arguments? Is this what you mean, or have I misunderstood you?" Right? So again, what Socrates is then questioning Zeno about is that, have I understood your argument, and are you making this argument to prove that there is no such thing as plurality? So Zeno says, no, you have understood this point completely. So then Socrates says to Parmenides, saying, "Parmenides, I see that Zeno's treatise is another means he uses, along with his general friendship, to get close to you. In a sense, his work is the same as yours, but he has made it look different as a way of trying to fool us into thinking that he's saying something different. I mean, in your poem, you say that everything is one, and you come up with excellent arguments to demonstrate this, while he says that there is no plurality, and again comes up with a huge number of arguments to prove this at enormous length. So with the one of you saying one, and with the other saying not many, and with each of you speaking in such a way as to make it seem as though there is nothing remotely the same in what you're saying, although in fact what you're saying is more or less identical, it looks as though the rest of us have missed the point of what you've been saying." Right? So Socrates, Plato's Socrates that is saying, "I've got you, Parmenides, you say there is only one thing, and Zeno, you say there are not many things. And in fact, what you're saying, you're arguing for the same point, but you act as if they are making two different arguments." "Yes," says Zeno to Socrates, "but in certain respects, the true facts about my treatise have escaped your notice. The truth is that it is a kind of reinforcement of Parmenides' argument against those who try to mock it by arguing that if there is only unity, the argument entails many absurd and even self-contradictory consequences. My treatise then responds to those who argue in favor of a plurality, paying them back what is due to them and then more besides. My intention is to demonstrate that their assumption of plurality, when followed through far enough, is even more absurd than the assumption of unity." Right? And this point is why it is truly what he's doing is paradox, right? So the doxa, he says, common opinion of others, basically they attack Parmenides and they mock him by saying that if there's only unity, it's absurd, it's self-contradictory, blah, 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 blah. And how do they usually do it? So for example, when Parmenides says there is no motion, they'll get up and start moving, right? That kind of a thing. So what Zeno is trying to show mathematically in some ways, philosophically, is that there is no plurality. So he is actually going against the doxa, right? He is going contrary to the doxa. In that sense, it is a true paradox, right? According to Aristotle then, Zeno is the inventor or the pioneer of what he calls a dialectic, of this sort of, this art of arguing, and this art of arguing not from premises that are necessary, that have been previously demonstrated, but from commonly accepted beliefs, arguing from doxa. In fact, Socrates does the same thing, And what he does is he takes these common opinions, he takes these doxa, and then from those doxa, he then comes out and sort of attacks these doxa and then tries to come to a conclusion by saying that, look, all these are absurd, right? So basically, this is what Aristotle calls a dialectic. Obviously, we have been using it via, now Hegel and Marx and everybody in a slightly different way, actually, completely different way. But the ancient idea of this dialectic was this kind of an elenchon, this refutation which Parmenides sort of talks about, the goddess who says, I'm offering you an elenchon, I'm offering you a refutation, which is this, this art of arguing from commonly held opinions. You don't start with like an axiom and then prove, like with the Milesians you have, everything is water, and then you try to explain how everything is water. Rather, you say, hey, that person claims that there is plurality, and that is absurd. So, I mean, it's a way of arguing in which you take, common beliefs, the doxa, things that other people have said, and you expose them for absurdities, you expose them for contradictions, you show how they are false, they are inadequate, all these different things. So, it's a way of argument where you're not making any positive claims, right? What you're actually doing is you are showing how the commonly accepted beliefs, so it's a critical, so it's a kind of a critical and negative approach to thought, and it's extremely important in the history of thought, in the history of philosophy, because otherwise what would happen is, if you think about it, with metaphysics, everybody would come up with, okay, everything is water, and then I'll prove, how everything is water, everything is air, so you have one person make like a big metaphysical claim about something that they can't entirely prove, and it sort of relies on doxa of a sort, right? It relies on your sort of something that on premises, on axioms that are not proved. So you say, well, we assume that this is true. You don't question that. You don't question that central belief, and then after that, everything else follows from not questioning that central belief. While here, this other method of argument that Aristotle says, was pioneered by Zeno, this dialectical way of arguing, where you sort of look at the state of affairs and you lay bare the state of affairs. You're not trying to make any positive claim per se, because your task is critical, your task is analytical and critical, and you have to show that it's really important to show that the proliferation of different points of view are not necessarily all of of value and should be taken seriously. Whom should we believe? Because people would say, well, why should I believe Thales or Anaximander more than I believe Homer or Hesiod? Because, well, they also rest on assumptions that are not proved. Yeah. So basically, this is a very sort of critical way of proof, and it is important even now. Even to this date, this is what science, mathematics, sort of critical thought, humanities, everything rests on, is this this way of argument which Aristotle calls the dialectic. Yeah. All right, so I'll give you a very short sort of introduction to what kind of things we're looking at in Zeno, and that we'll do in the next few videos. So when he gives these paradoxes, as I said, he doesn't have anything positive. He's basically arguing against. So he has well, whatever is extant. Of course, we don't have everything. We have things quoted by Plato or by Aristotle, by Simplicius. So what we have here are divided into two main sets. So one of them is sort of counted as argument against plurality, like the one that we had about the similar and similar one that we just mentioned in Plato, is also counted as an argument against plurality. So we have one set of arguments which are against plurality, another set of arguments which are the more famous ones, with Achilles and the tortoise and the moving arrow, which you might have heard of. So those are against motion, which I'll use sort of Kirk-and-Raven's division and a sort of popular division as well, in which two of them are taken as arguments against discrete motion and two of them as arguments against continuous motion. And then you also have some outlying paradoxes. So you have a paradox of place and a paradox of sensation. So we'll discuss the whole gamut of paradoxes that we have out here, and though not the more sort of outlying ones, which are we are not very sure are from Zeno at all. So yeah, in the next video then I'll start with the paradox against plurality. So yeah, see you then. Thank you.